friends, and welcome to another edition of the Bainbridge Island Historical Museum partnership with Reed and the Senior Center for our program Bainbridge Remembers Oral History. I'm Marilee Mostov. I'm the Director of Exhibits and Engagement at the Historical Museum, and today I'm filling in the big shoes for Katie Curtis, my colleague who's spending time with her family today. So first, I want to take a minute to acknowledge that, like many of you, I live, work, and play on the original Aboriginal territory of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers. The Suquabs live in harmony with the land and waterways along Washington's central Salish Sea, as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquabs live and protect the land and water of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. So as always, in this program, we've designed it to provide a platform where islanders can share their stories and experiences so that the rest of us can cultivate a greater understanding of our diverse history and nurture our connections to this community. Today, I am honored to welcome our special guest, Ralph Monroe. You may know Ralph as our 5-time Washington Secretary of State and one of Bainbridge Island's favorite native sons. Ralph is here to share some stories about his family and growing up on the Rock. Many of these stories are featured in a new book written by Ralph and his cousin, Elizabeth Monroe Berry, titled The Monroes and Montgomerys of Crystal Springs. And yes, this is available to purchase at the museum gift shop. Welcome, Ralph.
Good day. Good to see everybody.
Now, I just want to say someone's audio is on. Is that behind you, Ralph, that we're hearing background noise, maybe?
No, no noise here.
Okay. All right.
Somebody's got their audio on someplace.
So, I don't see it. But if you have your audio on, please put yourself on mute so we can hear Ralph. And hopefully not my dogs barking. Okay, so first, Ralph, we're going to look at some photographs and you're going to tell us some stories. But first, I have to say that when I started reading your book, I really chuckled because my immediate image was flashed to the opening scene of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that classic cult book movie my family loves. Because I imagined you sitting in the rocking chair in the front window of your home at Crystal Springs with a brood of young children listening attentively, because the book begins like a fairy tale for children. Can you tell us about that approach to writing this story?
Sure. Well, actually, we started 25 or 30 years ago after I'd gathered a lot of data in Scotland. And I wanted to write a book that little kids could understand and maybe take someday to Scotland with them if they ever wanted to go there or travel there, and actually use the book to find out where they came from. And so it was written in very simplistic terms and just trying to talk about the various roads they walked on and the houses and where they lived and what they did each day and so forth. And then when my cousin Elizabeth Monroe Berry came along, she's a really good writer. And we started to dig into the second and third sections of the book, which really talk about our grandparents' trip to America and settling at Crystal Springs.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the beginning of the story spent a lot of time. I love the writing. I love the tone. Hopefully everyone else here will get a copy of the book and enjoy it also. You start talking not about Bainbridge Island, but your family in Scotland. Tell me how you did the research for that part of the story.
Well, we spent some time in Scotland. You know, when I first made my first trip to Scotland, I asked one of my old uncles, I said, you know, who are relatives overseas? And he said, oh yeah, we've got relatives in Scotland. And I said, well, do you ever hear from them? He said, oh yeah, I just heard from them. Well, let's see, I'll go find you the letters. Well, the letters were before World War II. That's the last time he'd heard from them. But we used those letters and those names. And it took us a while in Scotland and in Glasgow to find the first couple. But after we found them, then they found everybody for us or helped us find the other people. So it was really fun. And if we hadn't done it then, this was about 1975 or so, if we hadn't done it then, it wouldn't have happened because most of those people were quite elderly and they were deceased just within a few years. So we were blessed to find them, and then they helped us find other things.
Nice.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'll share one story that particularly I thought really struck a nerve for me was about when Alexander, who's your, what is he, your great grandfather?
He's my grandfather. Yeah.
Okay, he's your grandfather. And his friend who came over from Scotland were working over in Seattle, and they looked over to Bainbridge and thought, what's over there? And they rowed over, just like, why not? Let's get in a boat and row over to the island.
Well, they were looking for a place to settle, and they were looking for a place to build a house and have a farm and so forth. And they looked over at Bainbridge. They were working on a building that's still there. They called it then the Bailey Building. Now it's the Henry Broderick Building, Second and Cherry. And they saw the kind of the cliffs there along by north of Wing Point in that area, and they thought they might be stone. And if they were stone, they were pretty interested because that's what they did. They knew how to cut stone, and they thought, well, we could use that for home building. And so they came across in a rowboat the first weekend, rowed across, and they found out the cliffs were all clay, but they went up a creek. I'm not even sure which creek it was, but I think it was the one there in Murden's Cove, or just up by Rolling Bay. And when they walked up that creek, they talked about seeing pheasant, and they saw deer, and they saw salmon in the creek, and everything they were never allowed to touch as poor guys from Scotland. That all that stuff was owned by the aristocracy. And they thought, wow, this is the spot. But there was no afternoon sunshine. So the next weekend, they rowed around to the other side of the island, caught the tide, went through Ridge Passage, and started looking on the west side. And that's when they located what became our farm. And one of the other fellows bought another place just down the road from us. And it was that was the location for the next 125 years or something like that.
Wow. Because can you give us a general date when they landed over here?
Well, they came, it was about 1889, 1890. Yeah. And it's really been fun because it was a neighborhood filled with all different nationalities and different types of people. And of course, Native Americans were still living in the community at that time. And it was, they experienced a lot of things that Bainbridge Islanders even have a hard time imagining today. And we've been blessed with a wonderful neighborhood at Crystal Springs. The Hanson family who lives next door to us, we've been next door neighbors for, I think, 126 years and never had an argument. They're just fabulous people. And so we feel especially blessed about Bainbridge.
Well, that's lovely. I know you gave Reed some photographs. Reed, can you pull up your PowerPoint with some photographs so that we can look at some of them? And I just want to point out again, the book, I'm doing a real promo here for this book. There are lots more photos in the book, but what can you tell us about this image?
Well, first off, let me tell you, the book, we didn't write the book to be sold to the public. We wrote the book just for the family. And now we found out it has had some public interest, and a few people have bought it. It's I think, a fairly good read, but it was never intended for that. It was kind of just a family book, so these kids, as they move through the generations, would kind of know where they came from. So yeah. That's our place. That's our place at Crystal Springs, and that little the beach still looks the same. The piles are there from the dock, and the house, the grandpa's house, is up on the hill to the left, and then the little house at the store, the little Crystal Springs store, is down by closer to the beach, and that's the store that my dad converted to our house and the house I was raised in.
Yeah, so the house on the hill is a little bit hidden. You kind of have to look for it.
Yeah, and that's the house that my grandparents built. And then as I was growing up, I had there's 5 or 6 family homes there. So we didn't get away with too much mischief because there was always an aunt or an uncle or somebody looking over our shoulder. But it was fun, a fun experience and a fun life, and something I'll always cherish.
What can you tell us about the family store, Ralph? I didn't know about that till I read the book.
Well, we had a farm, Grandpa and Grandma, and they had 10 kids and a big garden and a cow, and so there was, oftentimes extra food. They planted fruit trees and so forth. And people started to come to the west side of Bainbridge into summer houses in the very early 1900s. It was always looked at as a very pleasant place to live and beautiful afternoon, evening suns and sunsets and so forth. So they opened a little store there after the dock was constructed just to sell staples. So if you needed a little bit of milk, or if you needed sugar or eggs, or most of the stuff was grown right on the farm, obviously not sugar, but eggs and milk and vegetables and apples and so forth. And so people used it to kind of get some staples for their summer houses.
Okay. Great. So we can go to the next image. I just want to say to everyone, if you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat and we'll try to monitor that. And also we'll make time for questions at the end also.
And the next picture is the front, that's the front door of the store. And that's our house today. My dad, when my mom came to teach at Pleasant Beach School in the 1930s, and my dad and she fell in love, and he converted the old store building, which was closed by that time, into a home. And that's the house we still is our home, our family home. Now it's just used by the kids and the grandkids on weekends and vacations and so forth. Excuse me.
So that fence is gone now, is that?
The fence is gone, but obviously everybody on Bainbridge Island actually needs a fence like that today because there are so many deer, and that fence was to keep the deer out. And there's no doubt in my mind why there's a cougar on Bainbridge Island. I think the whole place has become a sanctuary for deer. So that was a deer fence.
Okay, great. Let's see the next photo, Reed.
That's my dad and 10 brothers and sisters, all in the same rowboat. And that was the boat that we called the Big Skiff. And it was used for everything. It was used to go to Bremerton to shop. And it was just a kind of utility boat, but also a boat the kids played in and so forth. And that I think they intentionally got all the kids in the boat and took that picture. So you can see the variation of ages, and it's fun because I knew all 10 of them, and all of our cousins did and so forth. So it's been quite an experience living around 9 or 10 aunts and uncles and so forth.
Now, did I read correctly that that boat was used to deliver food to islanders?
Yes, it was. The people along the Westwood, there was no road to Westwood, just a trail. And so my Uncle John delivered, he delivered milk to people at Westwood. He delivered food, and sometimes by boat, sometimes on the trail. And then starting in the 1890s, he delivered the Seattle PI. And so the newspaper also, and mostly during the summer months, of course. And then when we had extra apples, so forth, they would load them in boxes in that boat and take them to Bremerton to sell to the Haddon grocery market, which was down on the waterfront of Bremerton. And Mr. Haddon always bought the apples or whatever extra produce they had. They had extra. And that's the motorized school bus on Bainbridge Island. That's Uncle John at the wheel. And he had a contract. The museum has a copy of his contract there in the museum with the school district, how much he was paid to take the kids from the west side over to the Pleasant Beach School. And then I think he had a contract for the Blakely kids to go over to Winslow High after it opened as well. But that's the school bus right next to me here on the, if you could put me on the screen, I've got the horn from that school bus. Everybody plug your ears. That's the horn off the school bus.
Well, it isn't too loud.
Well, you weren't sitting where I was.
So your family had quite a connection to the schools, Ralph, right? So
absolutely. We have been strong supporters of the Bainbridge Island schools for many, many years. My mom died in 1962. Actually had a heart attack in the classroom. And the we started scholarships then, and we still give scholarships in the name of our family at Bainbridge High. We just, the young lady named Nordhoff just got the scholarship last Monday night. And where it's been a pleasure it's been an honor for us actually, and to see these kids succeed and to grow and to excel and go on to, some of them go on to trade school, some of them go on to be teachers, and just a wide variety of things. And it's been one of the nicest things that I think we've ever gotten involved in.
Oh, what a nice honor for your mom for that scholarship with your, I think it's both your parents' name, because again, according to the book, she was a pretty highly educated woman for the day, right?
Yeah, it was. And you know, my grandmother, who was a teacher in Scotland, actually only went to about the 6th grade and then became a teacher. My mom went to Bellingham Normal, which is now Western Washington University, and learned to be a teacher and studied there for 2 years, and came and taught it at Bainbridge. And Ida Thatcher also came, and Alice Klingbeil. They all came together, and they were all really highly respected teachers on the island.
Now, before we move on from the schools, can you go back a minute, Reed? I want you to share one more story about your Aunt Isabel and her important contribution to the schools.
Well, my Aunt Isabel Dunn, D-U-N-N, she married a fellow from Cle Elum named Gordon Dunn, who was a good friend of my dad's, and they lived right next to us on the other side. And she is credited with starting the hot lunch program at the schools. She was just terribly disgusted during the Depression that the kids were not getting enough to eat. And so she took her own pots and pans and went down to Pleasant Beach School and just decided these kids are going to have one good meal a day. And she started feeding them every noon hour. And she was a wonderful, wonderful woman, and a wonderful, just a tremendous family. And I'm very proud of that fact. And you know, Bainbridge has changed dramatically, and please don't misinterpret this, but when Bainbridge was known for its strawberries, it was not always easy. I mean, if you could spend your whole year as a farmer invested in getting a good berry crop, and then have a rainy day like yesterday and have it just ruined. And I thought about that yesterday all day long. I was on the island, and I thought when we were growing Marshall berries, they were, you know, sought after all over the Northwest and the West Coast, but one good rain would just really ruin them. And so the berry people, Johnny Cash sings a song called "We'll Get New Shoes at Picking Time." He's talking about picking cotton, but that was true with a lot of families on the island too, especially Native American families, Filipino families, Japanese families. It was a tough job to get a good berry crop and make it real productive. So there were lots of times when people were short on cash and short on money and needed help.
And your family stepped up to help.
Well, a lot of families did. It wasn't just our family. A lot of families stepped up to help. And you know, I can remember Mrs. Emanuel Olson, who started Linwood Center down there. She would bring the families into her store. She had the grocery store at Linwood Center, and she'd bring the families in, and they could pick, if they had to pick quality food. She wouldn't let them buy any cigarettes or any liquor or anything like that, any candy bars. But she just filled their bags full of groceries, and out the door they went. And I stood and watched that as a little kid. And so we're blessed on the island to have things like Helpline and to have the support we have from the Bainbridge Community Foundation and the good work that so many people do today. It's marvelous.
Tell us about this photo.
Well, that's my dad and one of his best friends. That's Harry Hansen. And that's the day I came home from the hospital, I think July 4th, 1943. And Harry, as I said, was I think close to my dad's age, and they were very good friends, lived next door to each other. And that's Reed's father and Jeff's grandfather. And he was a sweet man who was so good to me. And as I said, I think we've been neighbors now for 126 years or something like that, next door to each other. Just a fine group of people.
Oh, we don't need that image.
Yeah, there you go.
So I just want to go back, Ralph, because something I noticed, what I know about you, and personally, you, I think, is one of the, kindest, most generous and civic-minded people on the island, though you mentioned other folks. But I see that trend coming through in the book with your family being really civic-minded. You mentioned your Uncle James. And I'm just curious if that's something that your family talked about, that was a value that was important to your family, or maybe that was an island value back then.
I think it was very much an island value, but I know it was a high value in our family, that we, one of our responsibilities was to help others. And I think it was true with many, many families. And that included service to your country and service to your community. And that's reflected today of why Bainbridge Island has such good schools, and why they have such a vibrant community, and why they have, churches that really give and care, and why they have, programs that take care of people and so forth. And a lot of it also revolves around those 8 or 10 guys from Linwood Center who started the Bainbridge Island Rotary Club. That club has done amazing things, as have others at Kiwanis. So there's a lot of reasons for that. And I think it was an island tradition that just kind of grew on us.
So I'm going to see if everyone else has questions, because I just keep peppering you. I could just ask Ralph questions all day, but other people might have different questions. One last thing I want to ask you, Ralph, is having a grandfather who came from the old country, which we would have called it in my family. Is there, and often they had, different ways of doing things or memories from the other side of the pond. Do you have any memories of what your grandfather or grandmother did that was maybe unusual, or they like to talk about it being different back in Scotland?
Well, my grandma lived a very simple life, and I knew her in her elderly years, but she came as she was a 19-year-old kid who came, and she was willing to leave her family and leave her country and get on a ship all alone. And there were a lot of the stories, a lot of families like this from Bainbridge that came, that came like that, and then come all the way across the country and then settle there. And she'd read in Scotland, the newspapers had played up that all these bad Indians, and you're going to get killed by the Indians and so forth. And one of the first things that the family did, I think, and she did, was try to befriend the Native American peoples that lived there. And I know one night there were some Native Americans living on the beach just north of us, and this was way before my time, and their baby was sick, and they couldn't. The baby was probably going to die. And the lady couldn't produce milk and so forth, and so they brought the baby to Grandma, and Grandma nursed that baby, and brought it back to health. And then a few days later, the guy showed up on her front porch with about a 30-pound salmon that he caught and brought up to give to her in thanks. They couldn't speak each other's language, but and so this element of neighborliness, I think, was and is very, very important, and remains important today to each and every person. So our family's always tried to practice that.
Yes. How about some other folks? If you have a question, I encourage you to just unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, I'm Bonnie. Ralph, I just wanted to share with you that I'm originally from Michigan, and I had an uncle. They were Dutch, and the family farmed. He did not want to farm. At 17, he took the test to become a teacher, and he passed the test. he went to the school. He had two eighth graders that were 18. He said the first thing I did was pass them. So
Yeah.
they were gone. But like your aunt, he started a hot lunch program. He rode his horse to the school. It was a one-room country school. But he had the kids, he had a stove, and they'd have water, and he had somebody bring a potato and somebody bring a carrot, somebody bring a whatever.
Yeah.
And they made stew on it cooked during the day, and then that was their lunch. And I have his, they were called German silver, but the bells that he had on his horse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's good.
but it's those were tough times, and times that people had to dig deep to make it happen.
Yeah. I asked my dad one time, what did you eat during the Depression? And he looked at me and he kind of smiled. He said, well, we ate a lot of clams. And I think that was exactly right, that they were lucky they lived on the beach and they had,
That's right.
room for a garden and could have clams and fish from the bay and so forth.
Sure.
But it was very, very difficult times.
Yeah.
Bonnie, what I appreciate about you bringing up that story, and I keep holding up Ralph's book, which he humbly says he wrote for his own children and grandchildren and family. But I think the immigrant story and that new immigrant story really resonated, because I found a lot of similarities with my family's immigrant story and my husband's family's immigrant story. So I think there are these through lines that really resonate for a lot of us.
Sure. Yeah, and like today, why are people flocking to our border? Well, because we have freedom. And these boys, we always think, well, Scotland's a free country. Well, let me tell you, as a poor kid in Scotland, you didn't have much of a shot at anything. And these guys had the gumption to get up and to move on. And they valued their freedom. And, they came to Crystal Springs and they built a house and they built a barn and they built a cooling shed for their vegetables. And that's for the next big project was to build the Crystal Springs School and to make sure the kids had a place to go to school. And my grandmother served on the school board, and others around the neighborhood did too. And they just did their darndest to make sure the kids got a better education and a better education. And I still value that today.
Any other questions? Yeah, Rita.
Hi, Ralph. This is kind of a up from on the road. It's up from your house when you're going towards Baker Hill.
Uh-huh.
The last house on the right-hand side. I've lived here about 13 years.
Uh-huh.
And when we first got here, we're driving around and I saw that house and I go, man, that if I had a choice of a place to live, it'd be in that house at there. And I just wondered who owns that house, or if there's some history there about that.
I'm not sure which house you're talking about.
You're going up towards Point White, up towards the turn to Baker Hill.
Right.
And there that's the last house there before you make the turn. It's an older house kind of set back in the woods. It looks like there's two houses there. It's been there for a long time. And I wondered about that house.
Well, I'm not sure who lives there now. I think the Agasharas lived there for a while, and maybe they still have that home. I don't know. I'm not positive of who's there. There was a little house up behind it.
Right.
And the child in that house was the first handicapped child I ever saw. She was a little girl who had some sort of polio or disease, and I remember it was. I often thought about what happened to that child, where'd she end up, and so forth. But I'm not sure who's in that house now. I'm not positive.
Oh, okay. The house just seems so fascinating to me. So
yeah.
Thank you.
So Ralph, when and where did you learn to play the bagpipes?
Well, you know, my grandpa played the bagpipes, and the bagpipes were always a big part of family tradition. And anytime we had a family gathering or family wedding or whatever. And then none of his kids learned how to play. None of the 10 brothers and sisters learned how to play the bagpipes. And so my dad helped me with money for college. So I learned as a secret to play for him. And there was a teacher here in Olympia who was trying to start a band, the Olympia Highlanders, which has been in the parades there in Winslow every year. And so I learned from this teacher, and I was never a very good piper, but I got a lot of exposure because I played in the state capitol and different, places like that when I was Secretary of State and working for Governor Evans. But it sure has been a lot of fun and a lot of interest in our family. Now we've got 2 or 3 other young people in the family that play the pipes, and they're really good pipers. So that was kind of that story. But there's, a bagpipe band. We used to laugh about this, and the old joke was that you could people invite you to their town, and you can drink all their booze and chase all their women and leave town at no expenses to you, and then they invite you back next year. So that's kind of a joke, but it was really we had a lot of fun in the band and enjoyed it immensely.
Ralph, there's a question in the chat from Randy Worley. They say, I really enjoyed your Scottish March and Bagpipe Band participation in the Bainbridge 4th of July parade. Do you plan on continuing this Monroe March event?
Well, if they ever get the parade going again, we will. Hopefully. I'm going to be 78 years old, so I guess as long as I can walk down the street, we'll try to do it. We've been there now since 1975, every year except when these last 2. So if they get the parade going again next year, well, I'm sure we'll try to be there.
And now, correct me if I misread this, Ralph, but I think I read that your grandfather Alexander, who came over from Scotland, he trained as a stonemason, but he was pretty young when he did that, and so he came over on steerage. So yep. He wasn't able to bring a lot. I'm imagining a small bag. He had to really edit what he was going to bring, and one of the things he brought were his stonemason tools and his pipes.
Yeah, he brought his pipes. They were cherished. And we still have that set of pipes. My little cousin Peter has it. He's a really good piper. And we've passed those down through the family over the years. I haven't played for years now, but I sure still enjoy it. And I MC at the Highland Games and so forth. But Grandpa, was not only a stonemason, but it's neat for us as a family because we could travel around the state and see the work he did. And so his biggest job was the state capitol building in Olympia, which I had the honor of serving in for many years. And he was a lead stonecutter on that and worked with the contractors on getting that building completed. And my dad I think the museum has copies of a lot of the pictures we took of when my dad went down to visit Grandpa in that building. But there's things like he did the fireplaces at Paradise Inn and Mount Rainier. He built the first hut for the climbers of Mount Rainier when they go up to Camp Muir. There's the hut still there. They took their mules up there and carried their tools and built it out of stone that was right there on the ground around them. And he worked on, of course, the Bailey Building in Seattle. There's a whole list. I think they're listed in the book of buildings that are still around that he did. In the back of the book, I think there's a list of all the buildings that he worked on, and it's just incredible. Some of them have been torn down, which is sad, but some of the nicest ones are still there as well. So, and there's the home, our old family home, a real nice family owns it now. There, my grandpa and grandma's home, and it's got a lot of stonework in it that Grandpa did as well.
Yeah.
It was quite a skill, he was often gone for weeks at a time, and so Grandma was there all alone with the kids, and But when we went to Scotland and saw where she lived in Scotland, we weren't surprised, because she lived in a huge valley that only had two little houses in it. And so she was used to living with no neighbors, or maybe only one neighbor. So different type of life.
Yeah. I mentioned that to you when we were talking before this, how what struck me about the book and what I really appreciate is you did not skirt really sharing the story of all the women. And I mean, she's one of my favorite characters, is Janet Montgomery, your grandmother. Just how brave she was, the chutzpah she had to come here and live by herself with all those children for so long.
Yeah. And, basically she and then the older girls raised the other kids, and it wasn't always easy. I'm sure it was pretty darn tough, but she had been used to a very tough life, and what her parents went through, and how little money they had. We've actually gone and stayed in the house that she had 10 brothers and sisters too. And we've stayed in that house in Scotland, and it's not as big as the library at the museum, or as big as, I don't know which room at the library, but it's a very small house. But they raised 10 kids and had a cow in the back. And, it was a whole different world,
Wow. Let's see, we have a question. Where did your family come from in Scotland is a question.
Well, Grandpa came from the Black Isle, which is up north of Inverness, and Grandma came from the Morven Peninsula, which is on the west coast, just by Mull, and in the Western Isles. And so they felt at home here. I've taken pictures in Scotland that you couldn't tell if you were in Scotland or if you were on Puget Sound. They felt at home. They felt at home with the weather, and the weather's more mild on Bainbridge than it was where they lived in Scotland. And I think that was very comforting to them, just like lots of our Norwegian and Swedish and Finnish and Danish neighbors felt at home on Bainbridge, because it was very similar to the weather they had in Northern Europe. So that part wasn't unusual to them. And the amount of the plentiness of what they could grow and what they could capture off the wild, and then what they could fish and clams, and just all the things they had were, I'm sure, very rewarding to them. Very, very much so.
Yeah, you mentioned in the book that, I mean, this is something that's hard for me to imagine, that, as you said, back in Scotland, if you weren't a wealthy landowner, then you had no access to even go shoot a deer or a rabbit,
No,
right?
absolutely not. You would be, if you go to the antique shops or the antique museums and shops in Scotland, you'll see, I walked into one and they had this huge trap, and I couldn't figure out, well, looks like a bear trap from, you'd see around the Cascades of the Olympics, great big huge trap. And I asked the fellow, I said, were there animals that they were trapping that big? And he said, no, that's for humans. He said they put those in their gardens, and they trapped the humans that were trying to steal the vegetables. And it's hard for us to even conceive that, but that's the way the aristocracy was. And so to come up to a place where you could actually own the land and have a cow and have a horse and pretty much in a garden and pretty much live off the land was for them a very rich reward.
Let's see if there's another question here. Can you still have the skill to milk a cow? Is a question.
The last time I milked a cow was when I was running for Secretary of State, and they had a cow milking contest. And I didn't ever milk cows as a kid, I'll tell you that. So I knew nothing about milking cows, although my Uncle John showed me a couple of times how to milk cows and goats. But the last time I milked a cow was in a contest of all the guys, women and men, that were running for statewide office we were on a farm in Cowlitz County, and they had a cow milking contest. And the first one that could milk each person had their cow. The first one that could milk get a cup full of milk and get it across the finish line was the winner. And I actually won, but not through any skill, just luck, I think. My cow was willing to give up the milk, but no, I was never a cow milker. But our parents were, and that was just part of life for them. Somebody asked me about what did they do for fun, and it's because it's different today. But Bainbridge, they skated on the lake. There's lots of pictures of, and I'm just getting ready to bring to the museum. I just found 2 of their hockey sticks that were crafted out of some branches that they'd cut out of the woods, and they swam in the bay. They rolled hoops. They played baseball. They played things like King of the Rock down at the lake at the Pleasant Beach School, where it's not a game that the schools will let you play today, but they try to knock the top guy off the rock, and it's it'd be a dangerous game to play today. And then they asked me, what about chores? What did they do for chores? And they cleaned, they had to clean the houses. They washed clothes. That was a huge job. Ironing was a huge job because you had to get the irons hot on the wood stove to get them to iron without burning your clothes. They milked cows. They helped with hay. And, this time of year, when the 4th of July was always the time to hay. They cut kindling. They gathered wood. We always heated with wood in our house. So when I was a kid, so that's something I did do. My dad would give me 5 cents for a box of driftwood, and it would fit in the wood stove, and 10 cents for bark and for a box. So we gathered wood, but more our parents did that. They weeded the gardens. They brought in the cows every night. The cows roamed all over the west side of the island there, and they had bells on them, so they'd have to go find them and bring them back to the place at night. So they all had chores, they all had duties and jobs they had to do, and so it was a lot different. And then for fellowship, they had beach fires, and that was what you did, is you gathered the neighbors around a fire on the beach, and somebody'd have a banjo or a guitar or a harmonica or something, and they'd sing songs. And especially during the war, World War II, which was still I was just a baby, but the beach fires were a big thing because they could, it didn't cost any money. You weren't using any gasoline, and you could have a fire and have some fellowship with people. And Saturday night you'd see the shoreline, the west side of Bainbridge, and across the Illahee, the shoreline would be just dotted with beach fires. People enjoying their neighbors and friends and relatives.
So it sounds like the parents did a lot of work, and you maybe were only chopping wood, Ralph, or did you have other?
Well,
Making it sound kind of fun, but I have a feeling
we got away with murder. I'll tell you, there's no question about it. But that's, parents want their kids to have something better, easier, and so that's all part of it as well. I was blessed. I went through the Bainbridge schools. I was in Boy Scout Troop 496. The American Legion helped pay for the American Legion helped me to finance a trip to the Boy Scout National Jamboree in Valley Forge. I just had a lot of great experiences as a youngster living there. Neighbors hired us to mow their lawns, and it was a little different world. And for those of you that live in the West Side, I can tell you that I didn't see my father really angry very often, but I saw him really angry once when he told us that our house was worth, he assessed the value of our house at $20,000. And my father had a fit about that. $20,000, that's way too much, my good Lord. This house isn't worth $20,000. Well, go up and down that same street today and look at the price tags on the real estate. It's beyond my belief, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions? Yeah, Mark.
Hi. So we're North Enders. So my great grandfather came over from Ireland and homesteaded at Port Madison. So excuse me, Ralph, if you can't understand my accent. Um, but first of all, I just wanted to thank you for your service over the years. You know, I went to Commodore and followed your career as Secretary of State, and I just want to thank you for everything you said today. It's amazing. So anyway, so I grew up with similar stories, and but my question is about visitors from Seattle, because my great grandfather and great grandmother had the summer home at Port Madison, but they lived, you know, on Capitol Hill, and so I have incredible photos from their side of the family. And some of the stuff I've been getting into lately is because Little League just ended last week and my daughter was real sad. So we were looking at some of these old pickup baseball games, and you referenced baseball as a pastime. So I got these great photos from the 20s, and I think they're at Crystal Springs. And it seems like maybe kind of like back behind the old grocery store, your home. But this seemed like there was a meadow there and the Point White dock. So my question is, you know, do you remember or your parents telling you about people coming over, you know, in the 20s and 30s from Seattle on the various mosquito fleets, and how did you guys interact with them if they would come over and have these picnics? And, you know, was the Point White dock still there then? These photos have a picture of what appears to be like the Point White dock.
Well, the first person to show the pictures to it would be Reed Hansen,
Okay.
because he's got the best memory of anybody right on the beach there, and he's 92 years old, so he's a little bit older than I am. But secondly, that there were teams all around in different eras, different times. You know, there were teams, Suquamish and Indianola and Illahee and different places had baseball teams. It depended on what year, but if we looked at the pictures, you might be able to identify the Point White dock wasn't in till just before the war. But we let us, make sure people that have old pictures, make sure the museum gets a copy, because they really can help other families to identify things that maybe you don't know about and so forth. I'll tell you my Port Madison story. We didn't know anybody from Port Madison because we went to, as South Enders, we went to the South End schools, and the Port Madison kids went to North End schools. So it wasn't until we got to the 7th grade that we met the kids from Port Madison. And I became really good friends with a wonderful guy who passed away last year, Marshall Jacobson. And Marshall and I just really hit it off. And so one night I was leaving the house just after I'd first met Marshall, and I was about 16 years old and thought I knew everything. And my dad stopped me and he said, "Hey, I want to talk to you." And I said, what do you want? He says, where are you going? I said, Port Madison to see Marshall. He says, well, come in here. I want to talk to you about Port Madison. And so I was in a hurry. Come on, what's all this about? He said, come in here. I'm going to talk to you. So I did. He said, now listen. He said, you do remember this. He said, you don't ever say anything bad about anybody in Port Madison. Just remember that. Don't ever say anything bad about anybody in Port Madison. I said, okay, well, why is that? And he said, because they're all related. The farther I got into Port Madison, it was true. It was really true. And so everybody's somebody's cousin in Port Madison in those days. So it's a great community, lots of history, But I think we'd all love to see those pictures, see what they show. So.
Well, thanks so much for the story. And this is my daughter, this would be the great granddaughter of the folks who came over. This is Zoe.
Good. What was their name?
Bolster. And so they homesteaded near the yacht clubs there on Port Madison.
Oh, okay.
Well, the yacht clubs didn't exist yet, of course.
No, yeah. Well, that's really good history. Yeah.
Mark, definitely please reach out to me, Marilee Mostow. You'll find my email on the museum website, or
I will. Yeah. I just scanned a bunch of the pictures. These days it's so easy. I borrowed my kid's phone and just took some pictures of it. I can even send you like a little PowerPoint put together.
Yeah.
Well, and we'll schedule a meeting. But I do have to say, Ralph has probably the largest donation of collection materials to the museum. Since I've been there, have established certain shelves that I just put a sign, Monroe collection. Of course, some of it is from his time as Secretary of State, but I'm looking forward to seeing those homemade ice hockey sticks too, Ralph. I
Well,
appreciate
find a shelf that's about 6 feet long and about, a couple feet wide. When I croak, you can just lay me on the shelf and I'll.
No. You silly man, silly. We have time for some more questions. Any more questions? Let me see if
I'll throw in here something. This is Reed from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. And I want to let people know that we're going to be doing a tour that Reed Hansen has done several years. We're coming out of COVID, and people who are signed up and fully vaccinated should be able to participate in July and August of this year. So thanks, Reed, for agreeing to do that again. And so call the Senior Center if you're interested. It's a program that we co-sponsor with the Bainbridge Island Historical Museum.
Well, we're blessed to have Reed, because Reed has a really good memory, and he's a good teacher. He was a teacher for years, and we're really blessed to have him, because he's educated a lot of people about Bainbridge history, which is very helpful, I think. So it's been fun.
And Reed Hansen, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you are on this program with your son. Is there anything you want to say about living next to the Monroes all these years?
Well, yes. We've had a couple parties, and Ralph and I put one on about, how long ago was that, Ralph? About 8-9 years ago?
Yeah, 10 years, I don't know.
And anyway, we at party, and it was the Hansons and Monroes have lived next door to each other for 125 years without a fight. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we've had a great relationship. The families, Ralph's dad and my dad went to the little school down at Crystal Springs School together. They went to Queen Anne. Didn't your dad go to Queen Anne too?
Queen Anne, yeah.
Yeah, they took the Mosquito Fleet boat over to there, or sometimes they stayed in Seattle and then came back, because the Mosquito Fleet, the Gibson Landing, landed right in between the Monroes and the Hansons' property here, and it blew down in the early 30s, and then Ralph's dad built the dock next to it about 1939. Then the Point White Ferry went in 1940 to 1950, and
yeah.
So it's we've had great fun.
It's interesting too, as we talk about Gibson's Landing, and the part in the very back of the book, we did a little bit of history of Captain Gibson, which we'd all heard about, and at home we had a collection of postcards he sent to us from all over the world. He was a sailing ship captain, and that is very interesting part of the Bainbridge history. Shows a picture of his house and so forth. But if you go to the Rosario Resort up in the San Juans, you'll see the beautiful big maidenhead out there in the lawn off of one of his ships and so forth. So that's a kind of a neighborhood involvement. That's a little bit of an addition there that was important. And most people don't realize, like Reed just mentioned, that all the kids on the west side went to Queen Anne High School, because there were no real roads or transportation across the island at that point. And it was faster to catch the boat right there at the dock in front of the house and take the boat to Coleman Dock, the little Mosquito Fleet boats, and then they'd take the streetcar north to the base of Queen Anne, and he'd catch the counterbalance and go up the hill. And they went to Queen Anne. And Reed's dad and his aunt were actually involved in one of the collisions of boats coming home on a Friday night, and they were in the water for a bit.
It was on the Tolo.
Yeah, the Tolo. Yeah, and it's quite a story. So there's a lot of history there. Reed's a perfect historian for the island.
One thing, Ralph, do you tell them about the torpedoes coming down the bay from Keyport?
People today can't even fathom that. the Bainbridge Review used to have a little column on the, I don't know, third or fourth page, and it told you what days of the week, the coming week, and what hours you could not be on your beach. And there wasn't any question about ownership of beaches. You owned the beach, but the Navy told you when you couldn't go there because they were testing torpedoes on the west side of the island, shooting them from the dock and from the boat up at the Keyport undersea warfare location, just like they're testing underwater drones today out there. But these torpedoes sometimes went crazy, and one of them in 1954 destroyed our boathouse and so forth. But that you can see the targets they were aiming at, not trying to hit, but they were aiming at, are still on the shoreline there on Crystal Springs Road. They're triangle targets on piles out there in the water. So it's a different world.
Ralph, before we go, since you're talking about boats, can you tell us a little bit about the boats Lady Eve and Driftwood, which I believe are still sitting there on the beach in front of your family home, right?
Still there. Yeah, the Lady Eve was my Uncle Jimmy and his wife Carolyn's boat, and it was a sailboat that they bought and purchased, and they took it to the San Juans, and we always had boats. And then the Driftwood was the old boat next to it, and my dad built that there on the beach. A guy had a frame of the hull of a boat, and he bought the frame from him. It's the rough frame, and he built the boat there on the beach, and he named it Driftwood because it mostly was driftwood that he used to build the boat. Stuff he'd walk the beach every day and look for pieces of lumber and pieces of wood, and so it was mostly that he used to build the boat. And we had many enjoyable hours in those boats. Today you have fiberglass boats, and they're much easier to care for in so many ways. Wooden boats are tougher, but we sure enjoyed them. They were never to be fancy. And our parents went up to the San Juans once a year, and with my other Uncle Gordon, and he had a sailboat too. And they loved it. They loved to go to Port Madison and fish off Jefferson Head, and it was just part of Bainbridge life. And so it was a different place.
Now, once when you invited me to your home last year during COVID, when I was interviewing you, you told me this story that as a mother, I found kind of shocking, that every morning is this something your mom and dad would get up, your mom would put all you kids in the boat, row you across the water there.
It's hard to believe this actually happened a few times, but during the war, everybody was trying to win the war. And of course, the more time they could get in at the shipyard, they wanted to work as hard as they could. And so we would go across the bay in the boat. I'm too young to remember it. And Daddy would walk up to the Illahee Road and catch the bus, and then later in the evening go back and pick them up in the rowboat. And it's a mile across the bay, and it's just even hard to imagine today. But other people did exactly the same thing in different formats, trying hard to provide the production necessary and the workers necessary to win the war.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Ralph, for all of these wonderful stories. We're out of time, and if any of you have any other questions, I don't know. You're going to have to just email them to me. The thing to do is to read the book and get some more stories about Ralph's family and really the island. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Reed Hansen. Thank you, Reed Price, for hosting us, and hope to see you all again.